I'm retired Battalion Chief Larry Cockman, Chairman of the Greensboro Fire Department History Book Committee. The American Fire Service is rich in tradition and culture. A firefighter's life is filled with many emotional highs and lows. Stories of major fires, national disasters, medical calls, firehouse living, and family life are often verbally shared from one generation to another. Many times these stories are lost forever when a firefighter passes away. In an effort to preserve these stories, in 2019, the Greensboro Fire Department History Book Committee launched a new program of recording audio-video of our retirees' lives. These stories will be shared on our website, gfhbc.org. In 2020, we did not record because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Please listen as these firefighters share their life experiences with all of us.
George Trogdon, 82 years old. Who would ever thought it? But firefighter 3, pump operator, truck driver, and retired in 94 with 31 years, 1994. That was in 1963, that's a long time ago. I was working in an electric motor repair shop, had been there 5 years, and just so happens I was very, very confident there. And I wasn't thinking of changing, going anywhere, doing anything else at that particular time. But one day we had a fire captain came out to our company to do an inspection. And I got to talking to him, and we were just talking back and forth about first one thing and then another, and I started getting a little bit interested in it. So I took him off to one side and we talked for a while. I asked him, are they hiring now? And he said, yeah, they really are. I said, okay, what's the process? What do I need to do? He said, go to Central Station at your convenience, give your information to the fire chief secretary, and they will contact you for a meeting. And that's what I did. My starting salary from the Greensboro Fire Department, yes, it was $312 a month. Believe it or not, it sure was. Oh, do I remember certain people? Yes, I do. R.L. Powell was the chief. He was the leader. Cornell Russell was his assistant. I remember Lum Edwards. I don't know if you remember Larry Lum Edwards. Archie Hill. Do I remember funny stories? I call some of them. Yeah, I remember. Yes, I remember funny stories.
Sure.
Archie Hill was, he was top of the line in the classroom. He was the top scholar. As a matter of fact, he corrected R.L. Powell on a math question one morning, and we got a big laugh out of that. But he was gullible, Larry. Anything you said to him, he took it for what it was worth. So one Friday, along about 2 in the afternoon, Lum Edwards came to me and he said, George, he said, we're telling Archie, everybody here's telling Archie that we're wearing our dress uniform Monday. So you want to be in dress uniform? I said, okay. And then he whispered in my ear, he said, don't dress up. He said, we're just going to get to Archie here. And believe it or not, Larry, the man came in dress uniform. Another time, there was another man that Lum took care of. Went out and jacked his car up, the rear end of his car. It was headed out of the parking lot, and put 2 jack stands under his axles, and got the tires about that far off of the ground. And when he got in it and put it in gear, And that was hilarious. It really was. Was I doing something special by being a firefighter? Yes, absolutely. I was saving lives, protecting property, and being useful. I was there when they needed me. I think that's when you join a fire department or a police department, is so that you can help people, be active, and be effective if you can. The first station assignment was Station 9 on Friendly Avenue. I was just riding. I was on the truck company, so you're familiar with truck personnel and what we did back then. I'm sure it's changed a lot today, but that was my first assignment. As a matter of fact, when they hired me, I worked the first week or so at Central Station in street clothes. I didn't have uniforms yet. And when we went out on a call, first couple or two I went, don't get off the truck. Stay on the truck. Just stay there until we come and get you. I don't know if they did it for you, but that's what they told me. No, my first captain was on the truck company at Central Station. But then when I went full-time out to Station 9, Clarence Boat Bill, I don't know if maybe you remember him. He was different. He was a very smart man, very educated, and he was dedicated to his job. Well, I worked with Harold Smith, Wayne Brown comes to mind, Noisy Bell. He was the captain on the pumper. That's about it. Well, Archie was there. Did I say Archie?
Yes.
Yeah, he was there. I was a rover for about a year and a half, and I went from one station to another. They try to keep 4 personnel on the pumpers if they can, and even the ladder companies, but they prefer to have 4 less instead of 3. So they kept a rover in the fire service. So if one had to be on vacation or was out sick, then it was my place to go in and fulfill his job, do his job while he was gone. And I went to just about all the stations. Encouraging, I think. It encouraged me a whole lot because I got to meet a lot of the firefighters. And when you get familiar with somebody, Larry, you can do a whole lot better job, if you know what I'm saying. Yeah. Did I have nicknames? I've got nicknames now. But back then, I remember when I was roving, I was at Station 10. Leroy Cothran was my captain for those 3 or 4 days I was there. And on a Saturday morning, he had me and another firefighter, and I don't remember his name right now, scrubbing the apparatus floor. And he come out there with a bottle of ammonia and started pouring it on the floor in front of us. Well, naturally, we started tearing right away. So from that day to this day, he called me Bo Peep. And a lot of the men on the fire department thought my eyes were too big for me, and they always called me Bug Eye. So I had 2 nicknames, if you will. I remember, too, at Station 7, I think, one day, or one evening, the young rookie that had just come to Station 7, we put his mattress up on the roof, and he had to retrieve it before he could go to bed that night. And we went to bed pretty late, 11 or 12 o'clock. So he comes into bed in his underwear looking for his mattress, and it's not there. And we're all snoring or faking it, you know. But I thought that was quite funny. And I didn't want to get involved because I hadn't been there long, and I didn't want, you know. But anyway, I remember that one anyhow. When you talk about cooking and meat eating and the type meals and so forth, yes, we did that every day, 2 meals a day. Now, we ate breakfast, or we brought our breakfast with us, but we cooked dinner and supper, or lunch and dinner, however you want to say it. Some of them could cook, and Some of them could not. I could not. It was some kind of a goulash, if you will. It had hot peppers in it that had carrots and onions and basically what you'll put in a salad today. But it was red hot. It burned you up. And I didn't eat a lot of that. Why is it important for a firefighter to eat with other firefighters instead of by himself? I think first of all, you get to know the person. You get familiar with the person you're working with. Secondly, we get familiar with the folks that can cook and the folks that can't cook. And we can answer each other's questions about what took place today or what took place last week. We would get into conversations about that and kind of keep ourselves upgraded. Did anything funny happen at the kitchen table? Central Station, there's about, there's two truck companies. There's a pumper and there's a truck company. So we had 8 men most of the time. And one day or one evening for supper, one of the men up there filled our glasses. We got our own ice, and they would come around with a pitcher and fill your tea, your glass. He run every one of them over out on the table. Okay, we accepted that. We wiped it up and went ahead. Several days later, same thing, but he didn't spill them this time. One of the firefighters across the table from me accidentally hit his and spilled it all over, and every one of us dumped our tea on the table. I remember that. As a matter of fact, we got the first female at our station, and it was quite different. Maybe I was embarrassed, I don't know, and I didn't want to be embarrassed in front of her since I was a, quote, veteran at that time. So I kind of went to the captain and I asked him if I could get a transfer. I said, I just don't, my ethnicity won't let me deal with this. I can't live in the same bedroom with a woman and 5 or 6 men. It's just not my cup of tea. And I was being honest with him. And Willie Johnson, I think, was my captain at that time. And I asked him. He said, I can't give you that answer, George. You're going to have to find it somewhere else. So when I got off the next morning, I went straight to headquarters station. And I talked to assistant chief at that time. Mm-hmm. Can't remember the name, I'm sorry.
That's fine.
But he said basically the same thing. He said, you're going to have to live with it. He said, George, whatever takes place there is going to take place at all the other stations. So there's no way of avoiding it. If she don't stay, somebody else may come later. And if you always feel this way, well, then we're going to have to be moving you every time it happens. So I said, okay, I'll just make the best of it. And believe it or not, it turned out very well. We became real good friends, and we worked real well together. Some of the things that we used to do at the stations when we had downtime, which was very little, and I imagine the way it is today, it's a whole lot less than we had. But we had a lot of downtime, and some of us would get together and maybe study for a captain's exam, or we'd go outside and pitch horseshoes. We just did certain things just to keep our mind activated, if you will. We didn't do silly things. We did things that some of them even brought their Bibles and read their Bibles on Sunday and shared it with us. We'd go into the what we call the living quarters, where the television was, and turn it off. And he would come up, and he didn't preach, but he'd read his Bible. And there were just so many things that you could do there that probably other jobs wouldn't allow, if you know what I'm saying. On Sunday afternoons, maybe the families, some of them, now, I was never at a station where a firefighter had a family that came to the station. A lot of them, I never met their families. A lot of them I did. And they were pretty much like their father, if you will. The children were. I had one of the young boys. He must have been 8 or 9 years old. I just happened to be going by the pumper one Sunday afternoon, and he was out looking at it. And he said, "Sir," I said, "Yeah." We rode the back of the truck then, Larry, you remember?
Yep.
We had flashlights attached to both of the running bars on there. And he asked me, he said, "What do you all do with those flashlights?" I thought a minute and I said, "Well, we see in the dark, just like you do." So we just have to use them. And he just turned and went away. But that's one thing I remember. Well, you know, you asked me a couple of months ago about this interview, and it was going to be at Central Station. And I came up there a couple of days ahead of time just to ask some questions. And it just so happened that Chief Gerald happened to be walking the sidewalk when I got out of my car. And he stopped me. He said, "Can I help you?" And we talked for a while. But I never went inside, and he was very cordial, and he answered my questions. And I thoroughly enjoyed talking with him. Why is this interview important? It's just so you can get answers to questions for history. It's for somebody 10, 20 years down the road now said there used to be a firefighter blah, blah, blah at this station or that station. Do you remember what his name was? And I think this is a good way to do it. Every interview you get, I'm sure, is different, and they give you different answers and so forth. But I think that's one of the main reasons. It's historical, if you will. Do I remember the first call I went on? Yes, and it was when I was at about the second night I was at Central Station, still in civilian clothes and still riding a truck company. We went to the grocery store down on Davie Street, right in the middle of downtown. And when we got there, smoke was rolling out the top of it and out the windows and so forth. "Stay in the truck, George. I'll come get you if I need you." So they start putting on air packs and so forth and going in and out and back and forth and dragging hose. And finally they just pulled the hose back out. They found just a small container fire in the kitchen area or something back in that building. And they extinguished it very easily and the smoke dissipated. Do I remember one of the larger calls in the city? I remember when I was at Station 14, when you have a big fire like we had downtown, and it was maybe 6 or 8 years before I retired, so it was back in the 80s or 90s, we had a whole city block involved. And the first responders, the first 3 companies and the chief, naturally they started doing their thing, and they had people go inside up on ladders and so forth. And wasn't long, the chief called them back down to get everybody out of the building, bring them back down to the street. So, make a long story short, they were there all night long, and this started probably around 10 or 11 o'clock at night. And what they would do, they'd let these firefighters stay there for a while and not get completely worn out. Then they would come in and call in another pumper company to relieve this one so they could go back and get rest. We were the last ones called, thank you very much. Mm-hmm. About 4:30 in the morning, they called us and we had to go up and fill in. And it was quite an experience. All I saw was the debris and stuff that was left over. I never went inside the building because, like I said, I was a pump operator and that's where I stayed.
Do you remember what fire it was, what building it was?
It was on Washington Street, I think is where it started, and then it spread through that whole city block before it was ever noticed. And at that time of night, I can't imagine, and maybe the smoke wasn't getting out of the building or whatever until it completely mushroomed back out the windows or something. I don't know. To ride on the tailgate of a truck in bad weather, it was terrible, especially if it was cold weather, snow, ice, sleet, stuff like that. I remember one call that we were on, we were holding with both hands because there was ice on the tailgate itself, and it took us a little while to get where we were going. I don't remember where it was, but when we got to the stations, one of my gloves come off and it was frozen to that bar I was holding on to. So it's pretty horrible, Larry, really. And eventually we did get into some jump seats, but most of the time we rode the tailgate. How was it driving an open cab? It was wet sometimes, dry most of the time, but your visibility was better, I feel like. And I remember one night coming back down Summit Avenue from a fire out in that district somewhere, and we made a right turn on 16th Street. And it was early, maybe 9, 10 o'clock. I swung out to make my turn, my right turn, and this car come flying by me, and I heard a boom like that just by the time he got beside of me. But he kept going. Well, as soon as I got around the corner, I pulled over and stopped, and my captain got out and looked at that left side of the right side of the pumper. But there was no damage. But he said, Lord, I'm sure you hit that, or he hit you. You didn't hit him, but he hit you. And he kept going, and he said, I don't see any damage, so I'll put it on my record book, and that's as far as it'll go. Did I have anybody like a mentor or something that I looked up to? I had several of them, Larry, and there's no way that I could name all of them, but R.L. Powell comes to mind. Jim Goins comes to mind. I think about Jim. He was a leader. He knew what he was doing, and I didn't at that particular time. Larry Cockman was one of the best captains I ever had. And I'm not saying that to swell your head up, big boy. I'm telling it like it's the truth. We never had a moment that we disagreed with one another to the point that we got angry with one another. Never. And there was, like I say, there were several. Boat Bill was one of the first. And when I left there, Dewey Kibbitt, you remember Dewey? He was always friendly. He was always willing to give information. But like I said, there were so many, Larry, you just can't remember them all. Any challenges that I had to meet or had to deal with on a fire call or station or something, occasionally there were disagreements on the apparatus floor, not to the point of throwing things or hitting people or whatever, just arguments, if you will, and most of the time weren't but 2 or 3 people involved, and it was over with quickly as it started. There were times on a fire call. I went on a fire call to Jesse Wharton School out on Pisgah Church Road one night. I was pump operator. Willie Johnson was captain, and I can't remember the other 2. But Willie went inside with the other 2 with 2 hose lines. It was down in the basement area of that school. And one of the gentlemen off the back of the truck came and told me, he said, Captain wants you inside. I don't remember who replaced me, but he was qualified, okay? So I got my gear on, air pack and so forth, and I went inside. And one of the firefighters, I think it was Willie, Captain Johnson, we almost lost him that night, Larry. The floor gave way where he was working, and me and the other firefighter, and I'm sorry I don't remember the name, happened to be right there with him, and we grabbed him and pulled him back up. And he was scared to death. He went outside and sat down just to get his body back together, if you will.
Just one other question.
Did I have moments when I was proud, huh? Yeah, I remember one particular. We were tested periodically at the training center. We went out as a company, and we performed our duties. I was driving the pumper. They had an obstacle course set up for the truck driver, and I went through that, and I came back and I had to back up to the dock and so forth. Did all of that. When I got finished with it, the chief at that time, I don't remember, came to me and told me what a good job I did driving and getting my pump in operation quick enough and so forth. How did I deal with a civilian death? I didn't have that many. I remember the very first one I ever saw was on Yanceyville Street, just past 16th Street, in that little complex, that brick complex down there. We got a call about 6 o'clock one evening, and said there was a man passed out in the bathroom or something, I remember. But when we got there, the captain and the two men with him went in. I naturally stayed with my job at the pump, and wasn't long, one of them come back out and said, you need to go in and see what's going on. And I said, okay. And he stayed with the pump, and the first thing I saw, and it's something that I'll never forget, I don't think, there was a nude man half in and half out of his bathtub. He had done turned blue, and he was dead. And that was the first one for me, and it was very traumatic. And for a couple of days at the station, it was kind of quiet. How did I cope with deaths of the firefighters? Now, if you're talking about a firefighter on duty, I only remember one, and it was by accident. That was Jesse Gray. You may have remembered him. He was out off of Lee Street Extension, and it was the open cab. The captain sort of leans up and hollers, says, catch the hydrant. Truck driver stopped just past the hydrant. Now this is what I was told. I wasn't with them. Pulled a section of hose off, and then pulled another handful off and went to the hydrant to tighten it, to connect it. And by accident, the truck backed over him. You may remember that. It was an accident. I don't remember any other firefighters getting killed on duty, but I do remember Lacey Nelson. He died, and it was traumatic, like any death. He had only been with us a short time, and they discovered he had cancer. Jerry Norwood, you ever know Jerry? I think, if I'm not mistaken, he committed suicide. Yeah. So it was really heart-rendering, if you will. It was hard to deal with, but you know, you had to keep going. You couldn't just collapse. You had to go on and do what you had to do. Would I do it all over again? And would I do anything different? Yes, I've thought about it often. That, as a matter of fact, I wonder all the time what it's like now, today, with all the state-of-the-art equipment that they have now. They have something that we never did, and that's a jump seat. They have now, I think they have microphones that they can talk back and forth, so they don't have to go running around a large building to get to the captain and say, hey, Captain, something's happened over here. You know, I need some help, blah, blah, blah. You could just call him and you'd get immediate help today, I would think, and I think that's the way it would work. Yes, there's been a lot of changes, Larry, since I left, and I don't know. I feel like I handled it the first time. I feel like I could again. Successful firefighter. I think what comes to mind to me is one that exceeded the Peter principle. Have you ever heard of the Peter principle?
Yes.
You reach a destination in your promotion, and that's the best job you can do, even if you were promoted to captain or chief or whatever. I feel like when you reach that point to where you're doing the best job you can do, and everybody knows that, I think that's the best you can do. Was I in the armed forces? Yes and no. I was in the National Guard here in Greensboro for 6 years. I went in, I signed up when I was 17, which should not have happened, They should not have let me sign up at 17, but it was only 2 months until my 18th birthday. But I spent 6 months in the North Carolina National Guard. I had to go active duty training for 7 of those months. 5 out of the 6 I had to go in training. And that's the only time I actually spent in as firefighter. I was never deployed. I never went on the front line. Never killed a man. Never got shot at. And that's the only thing I can say. Never. Oh, did family or faith ever play a part in my career as a firefighter? I honestly have to say no. It didn't. My faith did during the transition with the ladies, and I thought about that very strongly. But as far as the faith, they all knew that I was a Christian. They all knew that I attended church services, and I didn't like foul language a lot, Larry. That bothered me, and I tried to steer away from it as far as I could. And sometimes it's hard to do. What would I like for the Greensboro Fire Department to remember about me, George? I had one captain to tell me not too long ago I was a funny man. They liked the fact that I was always cordial. I was always friendly talking, and I'd make witty answers to questions and so forth. And I think that's the main thing that I can recall. What advice I would give to a new training class or something? Keep your head on straight. Do what you're told to do, and do it as proficiently as you could. Like my family, what I'd like for them to remember was the number of years that I spent away from them, because I was away from them twice, 3 times a week for 24-hour period. Not just for an hour or two, but they were on their own, per se, when I was not there. And I'd like for them to remember me, that when I came home the next day, I took care of anything that needed to be taken care of. I enjoyed my career in the fire service. I was never disappointed, okay, and well, I'll take that back. I didn't get promoted, and I've never quite understood that, but I never held it against anybody but me. It was my fault, not theirs. I just didn't qualify. And I know when I made pump operator, I reached my principal.
In closing, the Greensboro Firefighters History Book Committee hopes you have gained a greater insight into the dangers, the challenges, and emotional events that have influenced and shaped the American firefighter.